He promised his dying friend he'd marry her. She was poor, scarred, please brother subscribe my YouTube channel please, and braver than he'd ever be. Wyoming Territory near Silver Creek, late winter of 1879. The cattle drive camp lay smothered in white wind clawing at the canvas tents until they sagged under ice and grit. Lantern light trembled on the seams, throwing thin gold across a bed roll soaked in fever sweat. On his knees beside it, Randy Mallister leaned close enough to feel the broken rasp of his friend's breath. Elias Carter blinked against snow sneaking under the flap. Randy, when you reach Silver Creek, she will find you. Do not leave her alone. Marry her. Promise me. Rye's jaw tightened. You know I do not intend to marry anyone. I know, Elias whispered. But she has no one, and she has endured more than you think. The gale rattled the guy ropes. Randy lifted the quilt higher over Elias's chest, tucking it tight. Outside, cattle loaded against the storm, riders cursing as they fought to hold the herd. He had always been the man who held the line, who kept his word like a lifeline. Looking at Elias now, he saw not the pale, sweat-soaked man before him, but the boy of 15 who had pulled him from a spring flood, both laughing to hide their shaking. A promise had been born there. Now the debt had come due. In a tent, groaning like a ship in a winter sea. Who is she? Randy asked. Carol Dawson, Elias breathed. Kansas-born, can sew a seam in a windstorm, writes truthful letters, not afraid of work. She took the long road because I said there was a home at the end of it. A name, a skill, a promise from a dying man, enough to bind Rye's course. He poured water into a tin cup, checked it with a finger, and lifted to sip. The cough that followed left him shaking. It was the mountain pass, Randy said quietly. You wanted the herd through before the thought turned the trail to mud. It was right for the cattle, Elias rasped. But I did not outrun the storm. The herd will live, I will not. Randy reached for the small roll of Elias's things. A nickel watch, a short pencil, a folded letter in careful script, and a clean handkerchief embroidered with a single E in blue thread. He smoothed the cloth, wrapped it in brown paper from a bar of soap, and tied it with a bootlace, his big hands moving with surprising gentleness. I will see her, Randy said at last. I will bring her the handkerchief, I will give her the truth. If she asks for my name beside hers at the church, I will place it there. If she needs a roof, I will see it stands over her. If she requires my presence at the table and my silence as well, I will give both. This is my word. Relief softened Elias's face. That is enough. She deserves a man who will not frighten when the wind changes. A man who keeps promises when no one is watching. I do not frighten, Randy replied. But inside he felt a different kind of unease, the kind that comes when a man sees a road and knows he must walk it alone in front of others. Generally in a vision, Randy saw this moment in his head as if events are alone. The cook prior pushed the flap aside, eyes red from smoke and cold. He any better? He asked, then saw the answer and removed his hat. More hot water, Randy said. They worked in silence, cooling a burning brow and warming chilled hands, the only mercies left to give. When Elias slept, Randy studied frost creeping along the inside of the canvas. 34 years old, foreman of the largest cattle spread in 3 counties. He was known for keeping his word and for staying clear of marriage built on duty. Now irony sat heavy. He had given his word in a storm, and that word would hold. He looked at the wrapped handkerchief by the lantern, and pictured a woman's hand folding it into her palm, the blue E. Facing outward like a seal. That was all he knew of Carol Dawson, and it was enough. Elliot stirred, eyes clearing for a moment. Thank you, he said. You pulled me from a river, Randy answered. Consider this even. Elias smiled faintly. Nothing is ever even, he murmured, then let his gaze drift back to the lantern flame. Relief chilled him. Outside, the wind rose again. Randy pulled the blanket higher and kept watch. Minute by minute, breath by failing breath, while the storm ground its teeth and the little tent held Silver Creek, Montana Territory. 2 weeks later, the noon sun beat down on the dusty main street, turning every step into a crunch of grit. Wagon wheels creaked from the east road, and a knot of townsfolk gathered at the stage stop outside Murphy's General Store. Word had traveled fast. Randy Mallister was about to meet the fiancée of his late friend Elias Carter, a woman he had promised to marry. They came from all corners, the blacksmith wiping soot from his hands. Mrs. Dobbins from the bakery still in her apron. Ranch hands leaning on the hitch rail with sly grins. Everyone pictured her the same, thin, pale, desperate enough to cling to any man willing to take her in. Randy stood apart, hat low over his brow, ignoring the weight of their stares. In the distance came the rumble of hooves. The stagecoach appeared in a haze of dust drawn by 4 tired horses. Driver Bill Cranford swung his whip once before pulling up in front of the store. The dust swirled lazily as the coach door swung open. A traveling salesman in plaid stepped down first, muttering about the heat. Then a weary woman clutching a quilt-wrapped bundle. The crowd shifted, waiting. A gloved hand gripped the door frame, followed by the hem of a dark green traveling dress. The woman who stepped down was nothing like they'd imagined. She stood tall, back straight, gaze sweeping the faces around her without a hint of shyness. Her chestnut hair was coiled neatly under a modest hat. A scar traced from below her left cheekbone toward her jaw, but it did nothing to dull the intelligence in her gray eyes. If anything, it sharpened her presence. A murmur rippled through the crowd. That must be her, someone whispered. Looks like she could stare down a grizzly, another muttered. She spotted Randy instantly, perhaps from Elias's letters, and crossed the space between them. Mr. Mallister, she said, voice clear. I am Carol Dawson. Randy tipped his hat. Miss Dawson, my condolences for your loss. Her eyes searched his unreadable. Then, loud enough for all to hear, she said. Before we go any further, I want to be clear. If your promise to Elias was given only as kindness or pity, I will refuse right here and now. The street went still. Even the horses shifted uneasily. Randy studied her, noting the lift of her chin and the steady set of her jaw. This was no woman come to beg for shelter. She was measuring him as much as he measured her. You speak your mind, he said finally. I do, she replied without apology. The onlookers whispered behind their hands. Randy felt a flicker of something unexpected. Respect and a touch of curiosity. He had braced for a burden, a helpless stranger. Instead, here stood someone who looked ready to meet him stride for stride. A ranch hand chuckled under his breath, and Randy shot him a glance sharp enough to cut the sound short. If you are here to judge my sincerity, Randy said evenly. Then we should speak somewhere less public. Carol gave a single nod. Agreed. Without another word, she stepped aside, waiting for him to lead. Her composure never faltered under the weight of every watching eye. Randy turned toward Murphy's store, feeling more than a few gazes follow them. As he held the door open for her, one thought struck him. He was genuinely interested in what this woman had to say. The back room of Murphy's general store smelled faintly of coffee grounds, kerosene, and oiled leather. Dust motes floated in the thin shaft of light spilling from the high window. Randy closed the door behind them, shutting out the murmurs of the curious crowd still lingering on the porch. Carol remained standing, her hands folded neatly in front of her, eyes steady on his. She gave the impression of someone accustomed to holding her ground. You wanted to speak privately, Randy began, removing his hat and setting it on a nearby crate. Now's your chance. Carol did not waste time. I am not here for charity, Mr. Mallister. I came because Elias offered me an arrangement built on mutual respect and practical benefit. If you intend to honor his promise, then that is what I expect from you, not pity, not ownership. Randy watched her closely. You think I mean to treat you as property? I do not know what you mean, she replied, her tone measured. That is why I am asking now. If you expect a silent, obedient figure to decorate your home, you should send me back on the next stage. I will not be that woman. He felt a faint tug of admiration at her bluntness. And what would you be? A partner, she said without hesitation. One who can contribute. I can work, I can earn, and I can stand on my own 2 feet. I will do my share in any household I am part of, but I will keep a measure of independence. There was no bitterness in her voice, only conviction. Randy leaned against a barrel, folding his arms. You talk like someone who has been burned before. A shadow passed over her features. I was a seamstress in Kansas. I had a small shop my own. It took years to build it. Then one night, a lantern was kicked over during a storm. The fire took the building in minutes. I managed to get out, but she turned her head slightly, and in the filtered light, the long pale scar on her cheek seemed to catch every detail. This came with me. My family had already lost the farm to debt. The shop was all we had left. After the fire, there was nothing. Randy did not look away from the scar, nor did he flinch. So, you agreed to marry Elias? Yes, Carol said. We exchanged letters for months. We understood each other. He did not promise romance, and I did not expect it. We agreed on security, shared responsibility, and the freedom to speak plainly. Randy considered this in silence for a long moment. If we marry, he said at last, you'll be safe at the ranch. I'll see to that, but I expect you to live there. This country can be dangerous, and I won't have you in town alone without reason. She studied him, and in return, he said, I will not demand anything you are unwilling to give. You'll have food, shelter, and my word on your safety. I'll give you the same respect I'd give any partner I ride alongside. Carol's gaze did not waver. And you understand I will work. I will earn what I can and I will keep some of what I earn. That's your right, Randy said. The answer seemed to surprise her. She inclined her head slightly. Then we are agreed, Mr. Mallister. This will be a practical marriage. Respect, support, and nothing more than either of us wishes to give. Randy straightened, reached for his hat, and settled it back on his head. We'll speak to Reverend Thompson tomorrow. Best to make it official before the town invents more stories than they already have. A faint smile ghosted over her lips. They do seem eager for a show. Randy opened the door and stepped aside to let her pass. As she walked out into the bright afternoon, he felt the first stirrings of something unexpected. Not affection, not yet, but an undeniable sense that this woman might prove far more than he had bargained for. The wedding took place the next afternoon in the small clapboard church at the edge of Silver Creek. Only a handful of townsfolk attended. Mrs. Dobbins from the bakery, Murphy from the general store, 2 of Rye's ranch hands, and Reverend Thompson, who presided over the vows with a simple, unadorned blessing. There were no flowers save a few sprigs of wild sage in a jar on the altar. Carol wore the same dark green traveling dress she had arrived in, its neat lines a quiet statement of dignity. Randy stood beside her in a clean shirt and black vest, his hat left respectfully on the front pew. When the Reverend spoke the words, "Do you promise to honor and keep one another in mutual respect?" Both answered in steady voices. There was no lingering glance, no romantic flourish, just a clear agreement sealed with a firm handshake before they signed the register. By sundown they walked to the boarding house where Mrs. Kowalski greeted them warmly and handed them the key to the largest room, the bridal suite, she announced with a wink, but Carol merely thanked her without a flicker of embarrassment. Inside, the room was modest but tidy, a large bed neatly made, a small table by the window, and a washstand in the corner. Randy sat down, his saddlebags by the wall. "I can take the chair," he said, nodding toward the upholstered armchair near the table. Carol shook her head. "That would be uncomfortable for you. We can arrange this sensibly. I will take the bed. You can make a pallet on the floor by the window. We're both used to harder sleeping than this, I imagine." "That's fair," Randy agreed. He began unrolling his blanket without protest. As they worked in silence, Carol broke it with a question he had not expected. "Do you know if the town has need of a seamstress or perhaps a teacher for sewing?" Randy looked up. "You mean to take work?" "I do. I am better for having a purpose, and I prefer to earn my own money when I can." He considered her for a moment, then said, "Murphy might know. We'll ask him in the morning." The next day, Carol learned from Murphy that Silver Creek had no resident seamstress. Traveling menders came through only once a month, and folks made do in between. The opportunity was plain. By the week's end, Carol had located a narrow, unused room at the side of Murphy's store. The rent was more than she could easily afford, but she was determined. When she mentioned it to Randy, he simply nodded and said, "If it suits you, take it." What she did not know, what he did not intend her to know, was that later that evening he spoke quietly to Murphy in the back of the store, settling half the rent in advance under the agreement that Carol never hear of it. "She's proud," Randy said. "Let her think she's paying it all. It'll mean more to her that way." Murphy nodded with a knowing smile. "You've got yourself a strong one there." Over the next days, Carol scrubbed the little space clean, set up a worked, and hung the tools of her trade, scissors, needles, spools of thread in careful rows. She sewed curtains for the single window, their pale fabric catching the morning light. Randy stopped by once, unannounced, leaning in the doorway as she hemmed a skirt. "Looks like you're ready for business." "Almost," she said, smiling faintly. "First customers should come tomorrow." He tipped his hat and left without another word, but something in the quiet satisfaction on her face stayed with him the rest of the day. Carol, for her part, noticed the ease with which the shop rent was handled, though she said nothing. She suspected Randy had a hand in it, but his silence told her he would rather she think it luck. That unspoken gesture, given without seeking thanks, spoke louder to her than any grand display. By her second month in Silver Creek, Carol's shop was a steady hum of activity. The front table was scattered with fabric, half-finished garments, and the occasional plate of cookies from Mrs. Kowalski at the boarding house. Mornings were for orders, mending trousers, altering dresses, stitching patches so neatly they looked part of the cloth. Afternoons brought 3 or 4 local girls, clumsy at first, with needle and thread. Carol sat among them, guiding each stitch with patience. "You're not just learning to sew," she told them over a length of calico. "You're learning how to make sure you never have to depend on someone else for every coin in your pocket." By the 3rd week, she had a circle of regular pupils, some paying with cash, others in eggs, flour, or firewood. She never turned away anyone willing to work. She also noticed the ragged children who passed her window to the schoolhouse. One boy's coat was so thin she could see daylight through the seams. A girl's dress was torn and pinned crookedly. One evening after closing, Carol repaired the garments and returned them quietly the next day. The children never knew who had mended their clothes, though the parents guessed. Her resolve didn't stop there. One night, locking up the shop, she heard shouting in the alley beside Murphy's store, a woman's voice. Frightened, she found Mrs. Ellen Parsons, cheek red and swelling, backing from her whiskey-drinking husband. "Go back inside, Miss Dawson," Ellen gasped. Carol didn't move. She stepped between them. "That's enough," she said. "You've made your point. Now leave her be." The man barked a laugh. "Or what, you'll sew me a lecture, or I'll fetch Sheriff Walker, and the whole town will hear why," she replied, steady as stone. Something in her voice made him hesitate. After a tense moment, he muttered a curse and staggered away. Ellen clutched her hands. "You shouldn't have done that, but thank you." "No one should be afraid in their own home," Carol said simply. The story traveled fast. Some said she should have stayed out of it. Others, especially the women, admired her. Not everyone respected her yet. A few whispered about the scarred woman when they thought she couldn't hear. Carol ignored it, letting her work speak. Each satisfied customer, each perfect garment, chipped away at the prejudice. The turning point came on a Saturday when a half-drunk rancher, Clay Dobson, stumbled in, dropping a torn vest on the counter. He said, "Fix it. I'll pay you next month." Carol slid it back. "No credit, Mr. Dobson. You know my terms." He leaned over, grinning in a way that made the 2 girls in the back pause. "Don't be difficult. It's just a bit of mending. You can trust me. I don't do business on trust alone," she said evenly. "Pay first or take it elsewhere." The shop went silent. Dobson's grin faltered under her steady gaze. With a grunt, he took the vest and left. By evening, the town knew. Some laughed at his embarrassment. Others nodded in approval. In a place where a woman's business could be undercut in a dozen ways, Carol had stood firm. Randy heard from Murphy before he heard from her. That night, stopping by to walk her to the boarding house, he found her sweeping the floor, lamplight glinting on the scissors at her work. "You handled Dobson well," he said. She looked up. "It wasn't anything." "It was," he said. "You kept your rules, and you didn't let